Hello and welcome to the UK Wildlife Podcast with me, Victoria Hillman.
And me, Neil Phillips.
And this week we have a very special guest in Stephen Moss. So hello, Stephen.
Good evening.
Stephen Moss, you may recognise, if you could see him, I suppose. That's a good start. You've been on Springwatch and a few things like that, haven't you, Stephen?
I've done all sorts of things. I don't like doing one thing at once. So I was first producer of Springwatch, and I've written a lot of nature books, and I lead bird tours and teach nature writing, and generally keep myself out of mischief.
Mostly, and occasionally joins me in Essex for little walks round.
Because I'm very good on
research.
research. You are.
Yeah. I guess we better start as normal with the podcast news. At some point I will write a jingle or something to put on there.
So we've picked up a few more followers on Facebook and Twitter. So Facebook, we're now up to 335 followers. And on Twitter, we've got 212 followers. So big shout out and thank you to everyone who's followed us and also interacted with us on both our social media accounts.
And the downloads are going well. We've had nearly 600 downloads since the last episode. That's pretty good. We're on 4,978 downloads. So we're getting close to that 5,000 there. And on Spotify as well, we're up to 135 followers and 329 unique listeners as well. So that's not bad.
Creeping up slowly, which is good.
So thanks everyone again. What's everyone been? Well, obviously we've all been fairly much trapped locally, if not in our houses. So what's everyone been seeing? Do you want to start, Vic?
Yeah, so actually these are all pretty much from yesterday and today. So I'm going to start, surprisingly, with the birds I've seen in my garden.
What?
Yes, you heard that correct, Neil. I said birds. So far, I've actually enjoyed watching blue tits, great tits, robins, starlings, a lot of starlings, house sparrows, wren, and blackbirds, and also magpies, but they don't tend to come into the garden. So I actually have, it's not even really a bird bath, it is a plant pot tray, which I fill with water every day. And they're coming down, taking their turns, having a wash and having a drink from that, which is amazing. And then moving on to the far more exciting things of invertebrates. I saw my first male orange-tipped butterfly today, appeared in the garden. Had a red-tailed bumblebee, a buff-tailed bumblebee, lots of nursery web spiders, particularly seem to love my strawberry plants, wolf spiders, an awful lot of black ants, dark-edged bee fly, zebra jumping spiders, they're out particularly on the sunny walls, and also a 22-spot ladybird. So that's my sightings from the last 2 days in my garden.
That's pretty good going. But you've managed to get out locally, haven't you, for your exercise walks, Stephen, did I see?
That's right. Yeah, I'm very lucky. I've got a big garden in Somerset, and today, partly because, the silver lining of this great crisis is that we're actually at home all the time. So really seeing changes with spring. As Vic said, I had my first orange tip a couple of days ago, first swallow on Saturday, after staring at the skies for days. And then yesterday, on my bike ride round a local moor at the back of our house, which is basically a flat, fieldy area, which doesn't look very prepossessing, but I'm up to over 80 species there in the last 3 or 4 years. And I got wheat ear yesterday, which is a beautiful, stunning bird on its way from Africa up to maybe Scotland, Scandinavia. And then today I was on my bike ride and I was just thinking there's one bird that even that's really common on the levels, I'll probably never get it here because it's so sedentary, and that's Chetty's Warbler. And as I turned the corner for home, a Chetty's Warbler sang.
Nice.
Oh, wow.
So I stopped, listened, heard it 3 or 4 times. It sounded quite low key, and I think it might have been a young one, perhaps just trying out its song for the first time, born last year. But yeah, so no, it's been really special actually. And a missel thrush today in the garden. Never had a missel thrush in the garden, had them overhead before, but I think this one's now nesting nearby, so I'll be looking out for that.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I've just got as I've mentioned, people who listen to the show for know, I've got a tiny little garden, not too far from Tilbury in Essex, and I've been doing all right. I've been supervising the kids in the garden, and I've had my first bee flies in the garden, which is my sign of spring. The classic drone flies and hoverflies. Birds wise, I've had some goldfinches coming in, probably a highlight. But there's almost certainly a pair of blackbirds nesting because they keep coming into the garden and using my pond to bath, and they'll be probably eating the tadpoles soon. Oh yes, my tadpoles have hatched, which I'm sure Vic has just forgotten to mention and kicking herself now.
Yes. Mine are actually swimming around in the pond because I actually sit there for about 10 minutes in the afternoon and just watch them swimming around. And my pond is now netted so the birds can't get in it, hence having a separate bird bath.
My blackbirds need to feed. Um,
They're not having my
I'm
tadpoles.
trying to attract diving beetles into my gun. And yeah, there's still the odd frog in my pond as well. Because every time I go near my pond, basically the top of my pond is just a mass of hatched frog spawn, and it moves when something's just been moved around in the pond like a frog. I've had a rat as well. We'll come back to that later. Peacock butterfly, had a white butterfly getting chased by a sparrow today. Loads of sparrows and starlings. I'm trying to think what else I've had. But I think highlight wildlife is for me was before the lockdown, I did grab a few pictures. And when I was trying to photograph a diving beetle larva, a huge hydra. Well, I say huge. For those who don't know, hydra is it's kind of like a freshwater anemone, but microscopic. So centimetre size is a typical large one. This one's about 2 centimetres with the tentacles. So just think of an upside down jellyfish on a stalk. And I was photographing it and filming it. And as I filmed it, a cyclops, which is a tiny little crustacean, a bit like a tiny shrimp, swam past and got caught in it and wrestled with the tentacles and then swam off. And it was like a miniature version of something from Blue Planet. So that was my wildlife highlight of the week, was in my pond man shed filming that. But still nice to see.
That's pretty cool.
I've only seen hydra 4 times in my life, which is pretty good. Considering that, I'm pond man, I'm always looking in the ponds. They're not the easiest things to see.
I can actually say, just listening now, I've actually got a pair of tawny owls calling outside the house, which is amazing.
Oh. You're in Frome, aren't you, in the other side of Somerset from me? But
I am, yeah.
No, we haven't had tawnies this year. We used to have them resident here for years, and a couple of years ago, they just seem to have gone. We've got little owls now. I haven't heard them this spring, but they tend to call more sort of later in the season, in the summer a lot. So I'm hoping they're somewhere.
I didn't really hear them last year at all, but they were building some new houses, and they cut down a lot of the trees out the back, because we live right on the outskirts of Frome, so we have fields and then a wooded valley behind us, so we're quite lucky in that where we live. But then this year they've been so vocal. I mean, at one point I had 3 different pairs calling from different areas around, which was just absolutely amazing.
Wow. I had what I think was a youngster at the bottom of my garden last year. So even in they get them in the centre of London, tawny owls. If you go to Kensington Gardens, you get them there. They're great little things, very adaptable. And apparently, I know you'll probably know this, Stephen. I think even towns, they take out songbirds as they sleep. One study found.
And of course, they're incredibly sedentary. I mean, that's why I'm upset that I've lost the ones here, because I suspect one's died, maybe the other one's gone off, because they don't, they rarely travel more than about half a mile from where they're born in their whole lives. So they're not.
Wow.
Although a few years ago I did get one. I thought someone like Mike Dildra had turned up and was having playing a trick on me, because I heard one in the early morning, about 11 o'clock in the morning, about 11 seas, and hooting. And I thought, that's a tawny owl hooting. And I thought, I must have been wrong. Next morning it happened again. I thought no one would come round twice and then not, do that. So, and then I read in British Birds that this is in the autumn, when the teenagers are out of the, come out of the nest, and they're looking for their own territories. So the adults, the males will hoot to try to basically throw the teenagers out, and they during the day, which I'd not come across before.
I have heard them in the day. I heard them at work a couple of times, about February, March time. So when I guess they're getting a bit. Maybe, I don't know, maybe they've seen another adult or something during the daytime, or they're just getting a bit confused. I don't know. But apparently it's not unheard of them to hoot during the day. I have heard that as well.
I've heard them. The wooded valley we have behind the house, when I've gone down there, kind of March time for some of the flowers and stuff, I've heard them calling during the day as well.
I wonder if they're calling to the young sometimes. Well, that'd be a different call, wouldn't it?
Yeah. It's interesting though.
They're cool birds, owls. You've got to give owls credits. Although my favourite fact about owls is when people go, the wise old owl, and you point out that their skull is like 90% eyeball, so there's no room for a brain. They're actually one of the more stupid birds, aren't they?
That's a bit harsh, but probably true.
Fantastic eyesight, not so good thinking skills. So I believe it's time to move on to the news. And we have got one bit of follow-up, which is on moles. And this sort of goes with a bit of a news story we've got coming up, that people are seeing more moles because there's less people around. We're seeing more of them apparently on the surface, crawling around on the tops. Yes, that's just one little follow-up from our mole topic. Was that last episode before last, wasn't it?
But I do wonder if just people are staying more locally, almost just exploring what they've got locally a lot more. I wonder if people are actually just seeing them more rather than them. If that makes sense.
I don't think there'd be any more active. I mean, there's about 30 million moles in Britain, and they're very common species that no one ever sees. So yeah, I think you're right, Vic. If people are spending more time in the same place, they're perhaps stopping and having a quick look because they're not in such a rush. Certainly bird songs, particularly in cities, friends of mine in cities are remarking on the bird song who aren't very interested in birds, and suddenly they are.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Have you seen the amount of everyone spotting the white-tailed eagles? Because it's obviously the time of year they're dispersing more, and there's the Isle of Wight ones we've mentioned before in this podcast a couple of times, I think. People have been seeing them. Kent have had a load. It's funny on Twitter, you can follow it, can't you?
Yeah, well, 2 days ago, it was shown yesterday. They showed the map on Twitter, and it flew not quite over my house, but pretty damn close, probably 2 miles away. It flew west from Wells, and we're sort of just north of west. And looking at the map, it was quite hard to tell, but it looked to me like it had, if I'd looked up, I might have seen it.
So, when was that, Stephen?
That was 2 days ago. Flew up to basically flew across to the coast, Burnham-on-Sea, and then to double back on itself across the Mendips.
That's really interesting because on the 21st of March, white-tailed seagull was spotted on the Somerset Wiltshire border, which is actually right by me.
Yeah.
Around Longley, and actually I think they tracked it. It was like over 100-kilometre circle over Somerset.
Yeah.
And on the same day, one was spotted in Gloucestershire on 21st of March.
I mean, one in Kent, one in Essex, and also there was one, the first one that went fly about a year ago, flew all the way across London.
Yeah.
No one saw it.
Yeah, we covered that in the last podcast, didn't we?
Yeah.
Or not last, the first podcast, I think. Sorry, not last one. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that one pretty much went over my house. It flew over Rainham Marshes, and everyone, that's obviously my local reserve, and everyone was sort of like, how do we miss it? But it could have been really high up, so no one would have seen it anyway, even with a 3-metre wingspan. But
yeah, so the Longley one is 10 minutes from my house. So yeah, I kind of managed to miss that one completely.
Keeping up, as David Lindo always says.
Yeah.
And as I always say to Howard Vaughan at Rainham Marshes, I'm too busy looking down at the invertebrates, frogs and lizards.
That's my problem. I'm looking in the ground and the undergrowth. I'm not normally looking up.
Yeah. I do remember. I think it was some bird of prey. It might have been a marsh harrier. It might have been a hen harrier or something passing through. That was quite good, and I missed it because I was too busy looking at lizards. I think there's a few of that came out. There was a lot of stuff on Twitter as well about these scoters. Did you see that, Stephen?
Yes. Yeah. They flew over friends of mine in bits of East Somerset. They heard them, and I mean, to be honest, I don't know a common scoter's call. It's not a bird I see very often, let alone hear. But people were identifying them by call, and I think all sorts of weird things have been flying around.
Yeah. From what I've read, common scoters, for those who don't know, are a sea duck. And they migrate north to breed every year. And apparently this sort of thing happens this sort of time of year, but everyone's got time to stay up and listen for them at night and stuff. So
yeah,
I've seen all sorts of...
Again, you've got planes, haven't you? You've got traffic.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Miss them, yeah. People have been having things like little grebes fly over, calling, There's a new thing now where you can there's a setup where you can record all night on quite a cheap recorder. Microphone, and it's really not very expensive. And then the trouble is, then you have to download it and scroll through and analyze all, because it converts it to sonograms. And people have been having the most amazing things fly over their gardens. I mean, vast numbers of birds that you would never imagine flying over. So it's quite tempting to do, except I'm not very technical.
I keep meaning to try and record. We have a starling that comes, and I swear it is the same starling, and I'm sure it was the same one that was here last year, and it mimics a buzzard call.
Yes, yeah.
And it sits in the hedge, and every time I'm sat out in the garden or I'm listening, I'm like, I really should record that, and I haven't. But we just have this one starling, and every time it starts calling and mimicking the buzzard, I'm always looking for the buzzard because it's that convincing.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
it's amazing. It's just like, wow.
I had one that did. I heard a green woodpecker and thought, I've never had one. And then I heard a curlew and went, hold on a minute, and looked up to the top of my roof, and there's a starling singing away. But they're amazing mimics. Well, the minor bird is a starling, isn't it? So it's not
right.
not that surprising. We'll move on to the news proper. We've kind of covered one of the stories already there. It was the white-tailed eagles I was going to mention. But I mean, most people have probably seen on the news about the goats going into the Welsh towns. All the mountain goats have moved because there's no traffic and no people around. They're going, gardens, these have got nice plants in, and they've moved into the town and started grazing. And there's anecdotal stuff about gulls that usually hang around certain areas where there's food dispersing out. And I mentioned the rat in my garden. People reporting rats that have not had rats before, because obviously people aren't dropping tons of food outside all the takeaways and around the warehouses where their lunch is. I've got some warehouses near the back of my house, and of course no one's going there working and leaving food lying around, and I think the rats are moving out.
Yeah.
I've obviously got bird feeders in my garden.
You guys are too young to remember the foot and mouth crisis, but
Or vaguely. Oh, we're both just about old enough, I think.
2001. But what happened then was, I lived in London then, and Richmond Park, of course, they closed the park.
All right.
And at that moment, all the crows and jackdaws left the park because there was no food. And I think something like 50 pairs of skylarks raised young that year, whereas normally virtually none do. So,
right.
it's not quite the same as this, but there'll be some interesting, benefits for wildlife, I think, of this.
I imagine the lack of dog disturbance in Richmond Park in foot and mouth would have helped as well.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I was going to mention that. You're quite right. That was the other thing that obviously would have made a difference. And ditto now, really,
Yeah. Although, except places at Richmond Park have been getting busy. Have they actually shut that now?
Yeah.
They shut it now, yeah. It's a bit of a tricky one, that, isn't it? Shutting the nature reserves. A lot of shutting the nature reserves, I think, is because, well, we might as well move on to the next news story then with that one. A lot of the wildlife charities are going to struggle now because they've lost income from people cancelling the memberships because they're not working or having their income cut. Visitor centres and cafes are shutting, which are a very important income. And I've got some quotes. There's Mr. Pibirdi from the Wild and Wetland Trust is saying they've had to furlough 3/4 of their 460 staff. And at the moment, they're very concerned. They're dipping into their cash reserves and they could only survive a few more months unless the government helps them out a bit. And they've suggested, along with the new Wildlife Trust head, that if staff can voluntarily go in and volunteer and go and help with the management and stuff. And they're suggesting that with all these reserves to manage, that if some of their staff would come back and volunteer, so perhaps the cafe staff can go and volunteer and do other jobs, I guess they're suggesting, then it's not doing their job, if you know what I mean. But they can't do anything.
A lot of the places have an army of volunteers as well. I mean, I'm on the committee for the Wells Group of Somerset Wildlife Trust, and we're all volunteers.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the other thing you mentioned about people cancelling memberships. We will be coming in to doing our walks now, our specialist walks. Our talks pretty much finish. I think our last talk's normally at the end of March anyway, but we would then run walks and that all the way through the summer. And obviously we've had to cancel all of those. And it'll be the same for a lot of the regional groups for the Wildlife Trust as well. And, that is a source of income. And that, although, comes to, the local groups, that money then does go on to, head office for those trusts as well.
So I wonder if they could get away with it. Take a lot of organisation if Wild and Wetland Trust staff could volunteer at Wildlife Trust and vice versa. They could get around it that way. Because although you can have volunteers, obviously there's current restrictions. No one can do anything really. I mean, the staff could arguably carry on, but a lot of the problem with volunteers is you need at least one paid member of staff to organise what's got to happen, don't you? In a lot of places, so which is going to limit them that way. But yeah, I mean, the little charity I work for just wouldn't be able to afford to keep me on without the schools coming in to provide the income. Obviously all the schools have cancelled.
So. Knock-on effect of all these things, isn't it? It's very...
Yeah. Well, my big concern is because it's very easy. Some people do seem to make almost a hobby out of criticising the RSPB Wildlife Trust. And yeah, okay, they don't get everything right, but they're a force for good at the end of the day. And if they go or they lose some clout, you can guarantee all the hunting organisations backed by their wealthy backers are going to be quite unaffected by this, and they're going to have more clout again, and it's not going to be good for the wildlife. Not to say all shooting groups are bad and stuff, I shouldn't generalise, but some of them, these people in these groups, want bird of prey eliminated, so or quite happy to let people do such things. So
yeah, and I think that's right. I think a lot of the NGOs are, obviously I'm involved with the RSPB Council, and I know they're looking hard at it, Somerset Wildlife Trust, and hopefully, God willing, things will be relaxed safely fairly soon, and we can get back to doing stuff. But yeah, I think we've learned a lot from this now.
Yeah, the one upside, a lot of people seem to be paying more attention to wildlife in their garden and nearby now, as we've sort of mentioned and alluded to in the last episode, and hopefully the long-term effect will be people care more about wildlife, but we'll see, I guess.
Well, I've seen a lot more people kind of asking, what can we do in our own gardens now, and what might not have a big space. and this is something we did talk about I think it was in the last episode, and a lot more people seem interested in to see what they could maybe do in their little space to attract more wildlife in, because they're obviously you're having to spend more time there as well at the moment. And
and it's the time of year when it's all kicking off, of course. I mean, I've done a few things for the Guardian and Observer about this. They seem very keen. And Today programme I was on last Saturday before last, and I'm on again this Saturday, because again they want a bit of light relief as well. They want something that's a little bit less, relentlessly dismal, which most news is at the moment. But I think some good comes out of everything, and I think there is a unexpected silver lining. Thank goodness it's April and not November. But I think a lot of people, as you say, a lot of my friends in London are remarking on the bird song, which I haven't really noticed before. And I think lots of good could come out of this, but it's always hard to tell. We've sort of stopped to think for a while, which hasn't happened for most of us for a very long time. Life gets busier and busier, and I think what bird song does in particular is we know it relaxes you, but it also, I think, gets people to think quite hard about the fact that there is a whole world out there that they can't control and is independent of us, and yet we interact with it. And I think that's what it is noticeable from certainly social media on this, people noticing that.
Yeah, and hopefully it's going to have an impact on the wildlife trade as well. So internationally, being that this base virus looks like it's been caused by eating wild animals raw and stuff, it's hopefully the one good side will be that will be banned. I mean, I read somewhere they've banned it, but then other things saying they haven't, and it's still going on. And there's stories in, how shall I put it, less than reputable sources saying that the market's opened up again, and they're going back to.
I think they have. It's it's always going to be a problem where you've got the economic benefits of that, which obviously for the local people you can understand, even if we don't condone it, you understand why they do it.
Their only source of income. They've been stuck inside, not earning anything for months. They kind of haven't got a choice. It's a bit like people moan about people shooting elephants in Africa, but if that food that elephant's trying to eat is your only source of food, not just income, food, then you're going to do what you can to protect it, aren't you? But it's easy for us to judge. I think we've got to be a bit careful. I think China can probably, they may be forced to by everyone else to sort things out there. Yes, getting too close to politics now, but so I'm going to steer away.
The thing is, it's not the first zoonotic disease to jump and cause a pandemic, and I don't think it will be the last either. They're there.
Absolutely.
They're actually scientifically they're incredibly interesting as well. Well, I think they are anyway.
Yeah, it is fascinating how they just jump between species, because some of these diseases, I forget what one. It's something massive jumps across. Diseases from reptiles into mammals. You're like, that's millions of years of evolution, tens of millions of years of evolution, not hundreds of gap, and the diseases jump between those two species. It's just, it shouldn't happen. It does.
It's doing what we do, isn't it? It's trying to succeed. It doesn't know it. We forget that. But as you say, Vic, I mean, they are fascinating things. It's just I wish they weren't here.
I'm not going to cliche and quote the Matrix, which everyone seems to be doing at the moment. That line from Agent Smith about humans being viruses, and I'm going to stop there because it's just too cliche for me. But
the thing is, I was having a conversation, funny enough, with my neighbours about this earlier, and saying it's a lot of these diseases, they make that initial jump from animal to human, but they then have to make the jump for it to be spread human to human, and a lot of them actually don't succeed. But the ones that do, we have no immunity against. So
what's the disease you can get from cat poo? I forget what it is now.
You've reminded me I don't have a cat.
A disease that affects mice and cat. Oh, it's gone from my head now. I'll do it in the follow-up next time. But this disease, is it Toxoplasma or Toxoplasmis or Toxicaris? It's one of those two. I should have researched this first, but I just thought of it. Basically, this disease, it affects mice and makes them rather than run away from cat urine, run towards them, so it can get into cats. So the cat eats it. It's not a virus, it's a plasmodium or bacteria or something. And cat eats the mouse, infects the cat, and matures in the cat and makes eggs or cysts or whatever it is, which the cat poots out, and then the life cycle goes round and round. But we can catch it from the cat poo, but it can't reproduce in us. And foxes can catch it as well, and it can make foxes a lot more tame, a lot less fearful. So some of these tame foxes might be because of, and then you get all the cat owners going, "Oh, the fox gave my cat this disease," but it cannot reproduce in the fox. It can affect it, but it can't reproduce, so you can't catch it from foxes. So that's an example of sort of what you're saying there, Vic. It's sort of like, a lot of these diseases, some of them can infect us. I believe a lot of the bird flu strains are like that. They can affect directly human, but they can't jump from human to human. Yeah, so I believe bovine for tuberculosis is the same. You can catch it directly from a cow, but you can't catch it between people. So
fascinating.
Diseases are fascinating, if horrible in many ways, but also vital in natural ecosystems. So it's like parasites. We've got to do a parasite episode one day because they're just amazing. Right, shall we move on to our main topic? So, Stephen, you're quite a prolific author. I counted on Wikipedia. Was it 23 books you've written? Are you keeping count?
It's about 40 actually, but because they're always on there. But that includes ones I've done with other people. And
of course, yeah. This is. I think that was just a self.
Yeah. So it seems quite a lot, doesn't it?
I'm still struggling with the first chapter of 1. So.
I've done 1. I've got 1, and I'm working on 2 and 3.
Oh, good. That's nice.
I'd have actually started a second book as well, but then I stopped myself because I forgot to finish the first one first. So, can you give any tips to people on, how to write a book and not dawdle 8 years like me?
Funny enough, I'm doing this. Well, there's a great story, isn't there, that a woman meets a novelist at a dinner party, and she says, "Oh, I'm writing a novel," and the novelist looks at her and says, "Yes, neither am I."
Yeah.
Or Douglas Adams' line, he said, "I love Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy Day." He said, "I love deadlines. I love the whooshing sound they make as they whiz by." I'm actually a different kind of author. I'm like A.A. Gill, who used to say, when he was asked if he was a journalist or a writer, he said, "I'm a journalist. I don't get writer's block." I write for a living, and basically, normally someone's paying me, and I'm lucky in that I'm writing about a subject I'm interested in. And I just sort of sit down and do it. It comes very naturally to me. Some authors write amazing books, and it's agony for them to write. And I quite admire that, because maybe it's agony, you spend more time on it, but I'm not really like that. I like communicating. I like other people. I like people reading my books, and I get a lot of nice feedback from Twitter. The nicest thing anyone ever said, a woman came up to me and she said, "Oh, I love your book about your village." She said, "It was so easy to read." And then she looked very embarrassed and flustered, and she said, "I'm sorry, that's not something to say to a proper writer, is it?" And I said, "No, it's exactly the right thing to say, because a book should be easy to read, and if it isn't, that's my fault, not yours." So I think the key thing is write about something you're passionate about, and just write it out. Don't edit yourself as you go, but don't use long words. The biggest problem people have is they use long, complicated words. They think they have to be they have to use words they wouldn't use in conversation if they were talking to you. Well, what you should always do, if you write anything, you read it out loud. And if you read it out loud, you think, "Oh, I wouldn't use that word in conversation." Well, don't. Get rid of it. Put something else in.
That's a good tip. I remember
It's
that
a
one.
really good tip, actually.
Remember, I do run a MA course in nature writing that takes 2 years to do, so I've got quite a lot of tips.
Yeah.
although I'm guessing, big words are allowed when it's scientific.
Yeah, big words are allowed, but great scientific writers, great scientific communicators, Tim Birkhead, people like that, Joe Wimperney, who I went to Peru with, they write really clearly. Dominic Cousins, my friend who writes books on bird behaviour, and he writes about quite complicated things in a very straightforward way, and that's the art of a great writer. I mean, Dominic has great lines like, "How do you tell if a lone medium-sized corvid flies over your head and you know it's a rook or a carrion crow, but you haven't got your binoculars, and it calls? How do you know which one it is?" And it's a serious question, and the answer is, a rook sounds like a crow who's been on an anger management course, and that's absolutely true. Rooks go and crows go and once you know that, you'll always know the sound. I can look up and think, "Oh, it'll be rooks," and of course ravens go but so Dominic's a great example of someone who writes very clearly about science, and he's a scientist, but it's readable.
And I think that's the thing, isn't it? As I'm a scientist by training, like Neil, the same. Being scientist by training, it's finding that way to communicate it to everybody.
Yeah, it's like when I give a talk. I love giving talks to general audiences, like Women's Institute group. You have intelligent, interested people who probably don't know a huge amount about the subject. They might, some of them, but whereas with a sort of bird club, they're all obsessive birders. Well, that's much less interesting because they probably know it all already. But it's nice giving a talk or writing a book for people who are not, I don't write my books for birders at all. Books like The Robin and The Wren are not written for birders. They're written for the general public. You know, they're written for normal people, not like us.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
not weirdos.
Yeah. Weirdos with pond sheds.
That's that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been nicknamed a few. It's either Pond Man Cave, Pond Man Lab, or Pond Man Shed. I haven't quite decided what one it's going to be yet, but it's a shed. It's a shed with a kitchen worktop propped up on some wood and an old office frame, so it's high enough up for me to photograph without breaking my back in half, and full of loads of junk because it's a shed. It has to be full of junk.
Yeah,
Well, it's not a shed. Yeah, breaks the definition. Basically, all my junk's in there because my wife's filled up all the space along with the children in the house. So anything that's
The
not
children,
valuable is in my shed.
They'll take up even more space.
That should be fun.
Good luck with that one, Neil.
Moving on to broadcasting, like I was saying, we could probably talk for hours on just the book thing. So if you think of something else, we can come back to it. Broadcasting, producing. So was it the first series of Springwatch you produced?
Yeah. I spent 29 years at the BBC, which is more than you get for murder nowadays. And I spent half of it in BBC Education making programs with people, and then I met a little bearded chap called Bill Oddie, and we started making a series there. We made it in BBC Education, and it went down very well. And we then moved to the Natural History Unit in Bristol, which I always say is like you're playing for sort of Yeovil Town or Billericay or something, and you get asked to join Liverpool or Manchester City. You know, it was like that because suddenly we were there in, you know, David Attenborough's backyard. But yeah, so I worked a lot with Bill. I worked a bit with David, Chris Packham, Kate Humble, Simon King, you know, all of them really. They're all very nice people.
I've met most of those people, and they're nice.
Mike Dilger.
Oh, I know Mike well, of course, don't I?
No, I was very lucky to turn my hobby into my job and travel around Britain and the world. You know, and making TV programs is like nailing jelly to the wall. It's a pain in the arse, but you know, afterwards it's lovely.
Yeah, I do remember watching Bill Oddie, Birding with Bill Oddie, which you were a producer on, I believe. Yeah. It was the late 90s. I could have sworn it was earlier than that.
No, it was 97, the first series.
Yeah. I did a little bit of research for once this morning, looking at all that. Yeah, it was. I would have been. I just did a maths in my head. I'd have been I'd have been in my early teens back then. So
right, yeah, that's good. I always like it when people say they watched it. But what's interesting now is you have to really have be sort of almost in your 30s to have seen it. So I meet, you know, I was showing some film students recently who were 20, 21, you know, and I was showing them clips of it. And some of them knew Bill, some of them had seen him, but of course none of them remembered the series because it was literally before they were born, which made me feel very old.
Oh God, yeah, that does make me feel old when the kids come and then yes.
Except the interesting thing is I do my test and I do it with the kids at my children's school. I've done it with these students. So yeah, I want you to think of I'm going to do a bit of mind reading now. So I want you to think of a wildlife television presenter. Okay, and I'm going to say a name and I want you to put your hand up if that was the first name that came into your head. And guess what? I can read their minds because I say David Attenborough and every hand goes up.
And do you know what's interesting? 10 years ago, if you said David Attenborough in a class full of kids, at least half of them would have never heard of him. It's changed.
Yeah,
it's changed. I once had a group of brownies, and I said like David Attenborough. This was probably 7, 8 years ago, and they looked blank. The whole group of 15 of them, you know, 8, 9 sort of year olds, completely blank at me. I was like, seriously? I said, what do you watch? Oh, The Only Way is Essex. And I'm like, oh God.
Mind you,
they loved the pond dipping though in the end, so it's just kind of. But now everyone knows who David Attenborough is. The whole generation.
The other person, of course, for that generation, and indeed up into their 20s now, is Steve Backshall.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Like on Deadly 60, I use that line so many times. When I finally meet Steve, I have to thank him.
Yeah. Well, I embarrassed my teenage children about 3 years ago. The last time all of them came to Birdfair, and they would have been about 13 and 14, and we were in, you know, the green room where the presenters go. And Steve walked in, and I said, "Oh, I can't resist this." So, Steve, do you mind if I took a photo of you with my kids? And they're like, "Dad, it's so embarrassing." But of course, they really loved it because he's such a nice man, and B, of course, they absolutely, particularly the boys, just worshipped him when they were like 7 and 8. So it was lovely.
Well, I heard he hosted the 60th anniversary of Essex Wildlife Trust, and his talk went on a bit long, and of course, everyone was. There's a few, you know, people wanting to get autographs for their kids and stuff like that, and a few older kids there and stuff like that. And I think he was there till 12:30, making sure everyone got a signature and all that kind of stuff. And then right at the end, my friend who was the photographer at the event said, "Oh, look, I know you've been going all night, but would you mind just quickly recording a message for my daughter?" He's like, "Yeah, sure, go on." And he still did it at midnight. God knows how far he had to drive home. And of course, he's got young kids at home as well. So, but he still, he was there to do a job, and he did it till a bit like Dave Attenborough at the Natural History Museum doing the last, what's the last Life series he did? Was it Life in Cold Blood?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
And he did the book. I think it was for that, or it might have been his life stories book. And Natural History Museum were prepared for a few hundred people, and like 1,000 people turned up, and they had to shut the queue. And he was due there to be about half hour to an hour, and he was there for over 2 hours, making sure everyone that queued up got their book signed and a handshake. And you just think
that's typical. The nice thing about wildlife TV presenters is almost without exception, they're very nice people because they care about the same things as we do. So, working with Bill, who occasionally people say, "Oh, it can be quite difficult." I said, "No, he's only being difficult because he wants it to be right." And he was, we work really well together, and I do still think that Bill is the only genuine genius I ever worked with. I mean, the others are brilliant, and don't get me wrong, they're fantastic and they're brilliant in their own way, but he was different from all of them, and he actually invented the style of presenting they all use now, which is the sort of look at the bird, mumble at the camera, say you're not quite sure what it is, take you for a walk. That's what Bill did. He took you for a walk, and that was.
I used to love it. I still remember now, and it kind of haunted me a bit because I still haven't definitely seen a wild crane. But there's an episode where you're in Norfolk and he's going around Norfolk Broads. Is it Norfolk Broads? Or maybe it's Cambridgeshire. Anyway, somewhere, I think it's Norfolk Broad somewhere. And right at the end of the day, he's standing on the bridge waiting for the roosting cranes to come in. Of course, in the 90s, that was a bit rarer than it is now as well. And I just remember thinking, "Oh, I must do that one day." And it's reading up on the programme, thinking, "Oh, I still haven't done that." I've seen common cranes at Slimbridge, but they don't count because they've just been released. And I've seen them at Pensacola.
We got cranes here.
Yeah.
These.
Yeah. There you go, Neil. You need to come to Somerset.
I keep meaning to. I've got to see the blibbing Perez frogs as well, and the
dragonfly roost. Yeah.
What's the
dragon? And the cranes. Have you not been?
Where's that?
Ham Wall.
What with the
four
spot chasers, the thousands of them that roost together.
No, really, I've seen them in huge numbers, but I've not seen them in the evening. This is at dusk, presumably. In June.
No, you need to go first thing in the morning, really.
Oh, right.
So basically, last year they had 2 roosts on the reserve, but one of them was in the off-limits area, and the other one is in an area that you can actually. It's just off one of the trails.
Yeah.
And they roost in their thousands in one particular corner of the reserve, and it only goes on for maybe about a week to 10 days. I mean, it's just incredible. If you get there, for sunrise and you walk down there, and you won't see them to start with, but then as that sun comes up, they all start making their way up, and there are literally thousands of them there, and it's just.
I've seen large numbers there later in the day. That's brilliant. Oh, you must let me know. We'll meet up then. Well, that will be June, presumably.
No, it's actually May.
Well, let's hope if the lockdown's off and I'm still furloughed.
Yeah, all right, May 2021.
Yeah.
I heard very much to my upsetness that Birdfair's been cancelled this year.
Oh, yes. Oh, that's something I meant to put in the news. Yes, I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, I got the email.
They say there might be a virtual one. I don't quite sure how that will work, but maybe we can give talks or something. But because it's so much effort, people like Tim Appleton and Sarah and the team there, Carol, they put so much effort into it, and all the visitors and all the foreign visitors,
Yeah, I think they're cancelling now, aren't they? So people don't spend a fortune gearing up and then.
No, it would have been. I mean, I think they knew, they have to do it. It's like all the sporting events.
Yeah, I think
it'll be by August that we could have gone, but it still wouldn't work because people have got to book flights and things.
And I think the thing is as well, like we don't know what the situation is going to be in different countries, so whether people can come or and cross borders and that, and it's one of those. I think for something like Birdfair, you get people that come from all over the world. They just have to make that decision early.
The first time that weekend in August, I've been here for 29 years because I've not been at Birdfair because it was I've been, I think, for everyone apart from the first 3. So,
there's a lot of people going to lose this. Well, you've still gone to every one, hopefully, but
yes.
Yeah.
I used to tell myself I'd only
you don't
go
think
every.
they have it without me. You don't think it's just a trick to stop me going.
Yeah.
Shh, Neil, don't tell him. Don't tell him.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, don't say
Yeah,
anything.
Mike Dilger told me to do. So, have you got any stories off the top of your head you can think of from your time broadcasting?
Yeah, well, I had some great moments with Bill. In fact, I do talks where I show clips from them, and there's some crackers there, including the killer whale that came out in Argentina, grabbed a seal, nearly bit it in two, then dropped it because it beached itself and the seal escaped. So that was good, baby seal, because we couldn't have shown it had been blood everywhere. The time we went to St Kilda, took me 3.5 days with Michaela Strachan to get from home to Antarctica, and it took me 4 days with Bill to get from home to St Kilda, and Bill was seasick virtually the whole way.
Oh no!
He said once famously, he said the trouble with being seasick is the first thing is you think you're going to die, and then it dawns on you to your horror that you're not. Him and Chris Watson were sound recorders were ill all the way. Me and John Aitchison were sitting up on deck with John filming minke whales leaping out of the water like sardines. So it was quite an interesting trip. But yeah, that was fun. No, we went to some amazing places. Poland, of course, with the lovely Marek Rakowski, who I normally see at Birdfair with his family. Mallorca. Where else did we go? Shetland. Bill being attacked by skuas in Shetland. We had some great fun. Actually, it was a lovely thing to do because it was my hobby and turning my hobby into my job and getting other people to share our enthusiasm for wildlife, which was the thing really what makes me tick really.
Yeah, it's always a thrill. I mean, obviously I'm not doing it on TV, but when you do talks, it is. I quite often get told, especially when I'm talking on pond creatures and stuff like that, that my enthusiasm comes across for it, and they discover things. I mean, even when I go to a naturalist group, if I talk about pond creatures, I'm lucky if there's 1 or 2 people in the audience that have any familiarity with most of the things I'm showing them. It's and they're just wowed by what's in their ponds. It's always
Absolutely.
great.
And obviously, when I saw that when we went to see those dragonflies and damselflies that you took me to see, and the other stuff, the bee wolves and things. I'm okay on things like the butterflies and dragonflies and damselflies, but once we got to Canvey Wick and you were showing me incredible things there, and it was great. It's like if I go out with Brett Westwood or Mike Dilger, people who have an area of knowledge that I don't have. I love.
Oh yeah.
Getting that enthusiasm,
Yeah, you can't beat someone with spending time with someone with greater knowledge or local knowledge. I always find that you could walk around. I remember I went to the New Forest. I think I went twice, and I saw some nice things. And then I spoke to a man that is basically an oracle of the New Forest. I mean, the New Forest Association, National Park Association, get him to survey for like goshawks and hobbies for them, even though he doesn't. And the stuff he doesn't know about the New Forest isn't worth knowing. And yeah, with a few tips from him and being shown, he showed me some fantastic fungi, like really rare stuff, and top bloke. But yeah, like you say,
the nice thing about doing the Accidental Countryside book, the one I met you with, was that I met people like you everywhere I went. I'd meet either professionals or semi-professionals or amateur, in the best sense, naturalists. Northern Ireland, Wales, whatever. North of England, Scotland. And I had this sort of tour of the country to all these strange places that had been built. The premise of the book, The Accidental Countryside, is that we built these places for us, and then humans, either moved out or wildlife either moved in or coexisted with us, or we abandoned the place and then they moved in. So you end up with fantastic wildlife, and that included, military sites, golf courses, gravel pits, quarries, and of course the Canvey Wick brownfield site.
Yeah, for those who don't know, Canvey Wick it was going to be an oil refinery in the 70s, and then I believe it's the oil crashing, wasn't it, or something like that?
That's right. An oil crisis. Funny enough, it wasn't the price crashing; it was the opposite. The prices went up, but we couldn't get oil because some Middle Eastern war, I think. Yeah. And they ended up never opening it, and of course they never actually built it, did they? They made the storage tanks, and I think took them down.
Yeah. So you got these huge, great concrete circles of what must be sort of 50, 100 meters across, aren't they? And got all these, half of the plants here, I think, are garden escapes and stuff, and
it's a lot
all
of
these pioneer species.
Yeah. But then fantastic invertebrates, isn't it?
Oh,
I mean, I think it's second only to Dungeness.
Well, depends who you ask. There's some people per hectare, it's got more than anywhere else, I think.
Really?
Minsmere claims it's got the most species sometimes, and so does Wicken Fen. So it depends how you define it. I suppose.
Yeah. Well,
but it's got a species endemic to the site entirely, I believe, and it's quite interesting because it's a weird site because it's a brownfield site. It's rich because it isn't managed, but if you don't manage it at all, it'll just revert to woodland. And
Yeah.
a bit of debate with some Canvey residents. I think I might have mentioned this to you when we were walking around. And they were all very, because the RSOB helped with the management along with bug life, and they cut a load of the trees down or back and sort of thinned out the scrub and stuff like that. And people were like, oh, it would have been nice to have some mature woodland on Canvey. And you're thinking, well, that's going to take like 200-300 years anyway.
Yeah.
And this site
Oh,
is unique, you know. And I have to admit, a couple of years later, when all the scrub sort of scrubbed up thicker and they started getting nightingales on the site, a lot of the people went, nope, fair enough, they were right, it's really nice now. And they're doing, I believe they've been doing the scrapes for the bee wolves again this winter. So
yeah, you have to manage places like that, don't you, normally? But you're right. And the main point about all the places in my book was that none of them have been sprayed or intensively farmed. And that's why they're good. But I was talking to someone the other day about it, and I was saying, ironically, I wish I hadn't had to write the book, because if the rest of the countryside was any good, we wouldn't take any notice of places like Canvey. They'd be good, but so would everywhere else.
Exactly.
They'd sort of become irrelevant. Instead of which, Canvey is an absolute beacon in the, in the sort of pantheon of nature reserves. But that is the problem with Britain, isn't it? That the countryside itself is pretty poor.
Well, I've spoken to, had interesting conversations with people. I hard to say this without sounding like an arrogant prat, but less knowledgeable. And you try and explain to them that building on the green, from a wildlife perspective at least, not from the NIMBY perspective, from the wildlife perspective, building on a greenfield site of farmland is better for wildlife than building on a brownfield site.
Well, like Chris Baines in the book, where my old mentor, Chris Baines, and colleague, a lovely man, and he came up with a line: how do you improve the biodiversity of an arable field? Build a housing estate on it.
Yeah.
And of course, he's right, but yeah.
Actually, it sounds ridiculous, but it's true quite often.
I go to a housing estate in the book, which is done near Aylesbury in conjunction with the RSPB, and it's fantastic for wildlife because they're building it really well. It's a really impressive place. So you can do it, and that's because it was built on a greenfield site, so they had very high levels that they had to sort of meet in terms of preserving, enhancing biodiversity, really, because there wasn't any wildlife there before.
No, exactly.
But there is now, so...
Yeah, well, one of the good things with current planning is because of the eye on flooding, almost every new estate has to have a, what do they call it, like a flood pool or flood lake.
Right. Yeah, well, this place had dragonflies in, little egrets were feeding in one of them,
I mean, I've had the flood pools at Stansted Airport last year. So obviously, when they expanded the airport, I think it's fairly recent, these pools. They've done some work over there. I didn't find out until a couple of months ago, annoyingly. Had lesser emperor and red-veined darter dragonfly on there, two of the rarest species in Britain. And along with, a lot of the other things. And I think some reported scarce emerald there, which is another rare species.
Yeah.
And I told you last year, didn't I? One reason you came down to Essex was to try and get the southern emerald, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
A reclaimed landfill site in Essex. They're capping it off. They're finishing capping it off. They got a volunteer surveyor going around, and he put on Facebook, what's this damselfly? It looks a bit like a scarce emerald. I'm looking at it going, it's not a scarce, it's not a willow. And then it dawned on me it's a southern emerald damselfly, which is again one of the rarer. Okay, it's a recent colonist, which is why it's probably so rare, but it's still quite a specialist species.
Absolutely.
And it's this fantastic pond, absolutely perfect for it, full of scarce emeralds as well.
I missed last year and the year before. I went to the site and I just got the directions wrong in west of London, Beaconsfield.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's the only British damselfly I haven't seen now, actually.
Oh, wow. Well, you'll have to come to Essex. Well, hopefully lockdown will be gone by July, August.
I'll tell you, if it's clear that weekend when Birdfair was on, I'll come over. You never know. It'd be nice to get out again, wouldn't it? But for the moment, I'm enjoying wildlife where I am. I had a very good sighting wheat ear yesterday, first of the year that I've seen on my little patch at the back where I do my exercise. And then today, this Chetty's Warbler. So I'm very happy, actually hearing and seeing birds that, I'm not expecting, because I'd never spend this much time here,
Yeah, I mean, I've never managed a decent picture of a goldfinch, and I've got them coming into my feeders in my garden, and I've always keep thinking, I must make the effort one day. Well, I haven't got much excuse now, have I?
Well,
Other
Neil,
than
we
my
need
children
to
running
do
the garden.
because we've got knapweed growing in the garden. I've no idea, because I when I built the pond, cleared a little area to do a wildflower patch as well, trying to track the invertebrate things. When we moved in, it was grass and decking, which there was just no life there at all. But common knapweeds appeared there, And last year, about August, September time, I think the most I've had in there was about 7 or 8 goldfinches feeding off it.
Yeah, well, they love knapweed. Yeah,
It's
and
just
so
amazing,
beautiful.
and to see it in such a natural environment as well,
Yeah,
rather
they were
than,
a rare
not
bird.
on a bird feeder or anything.
Yeah, people would go mad, wouldn't they, if that was a rare bird?
Yeah.
Plants do get overlooked, poor things. I mean, they built Amazon warehouse down the road to me. There's basically a big patch of grazing marsh between me and Tilbury. And before I moved in, they built a huge school on one corner of it. Then they've built a bunch of warehouses on another corner of it, and then they built an Amazon warehouse on another corner of it. And the ecologist went down there and said, "Oh, it's all whatever the common rushes down there." But we've got loads of records from sort of a year or two before, unless they all died out mysteriously, of some rare rushes and stuff down there. But of course, the ecologist declared it all common stuff. Probably didn't know it was IDing, and it got built on.
Yeah,
And there used to be shorted owls hunting down there in winter, but there's not much chance of that these days. So,
well, the trouble
yeah.
is these places generally aren't protected, and if they're called brownfield sites, I get really cross with that.
Yeah.
Name, because there are of course lots of brownfield sites that are very sensible places to build on. If you've got down the road from you've got a petrol station that's closed down, it's not needed anymore, maybe a superstore's been built somewhere else, makes sense to build on that, because it's not going to have anything that special on it. But if it's somewhere like Canvey Wick or Lodge Hill in Kent, which were more Nightingale, Britain, and that was built on, very close to being built on. So
it's pretty much gone, but apparently they're still hovering around there, or when they build on part of it or something like that, as I've been hearing recently.
That's right. Yeah,
rumours
to the edge, and that could be. Yeah.
But the problem is, you build an estate next to it, then they put paths through it, and then literally every man and his dog goes in there with it off the lead.
Yeah.
And cats. Yeah. I mean, Rainer Marsh, I've mentioned before on this program, Rainer Marsh is the lizard colony at the end of the reserve with all the building estate next door. There's more and more cats over there, and I'm seeing less and less lizards.
But interestingly, actually here, so we've lived more or less in the same area now since 2011. So 9 years we've lived in this area and moved to this house 4 years ago. And you used to see a lot more frogs, and suddenly cat numbers have gone up. Not seeing, I've got a couple of very distinctive frogs that come into the garden. I've not seen them at all this year, but the cat numbers have just gone through the roof. And I fear for the little ones when they leave my pond in June and make their way. But I think cats are doing so much damage now.
Yeah. Well, the other 50 million pheasants being released into the country.
Yeah, I was going to mention that.
They peck adders, they peck slow worms. They'll peck at anything if it moves. So they're not eating snakes and lizards, but they have not.
They do eat the lizards. That's for sure. Yeah, there's a couple of pictures of them eating common lizards.
But they will just kill adders.
Yeah.
We've had a few instances. One of the sites, obviously not been up there this year, unfortunately, but one of the sites I'm normally up at doing some survey work, we've had quite a few adders that have, the pheasant population up there is quite large, and they just take them out.
Yeah, we're lucky here because it's a bit wet for pheasants on the ground here. In the West Somerset, there's thousands of them, but near where I live, there's very few. But
there's a lot more up on the Mendips.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
There's a wonderful pheasant that sits outside my office making a racket all the time, and don't get me wrong, I do love them. They're lovely, but I keep seeing them down. Some of you, one of the early episodes, I was talking about having 10 lizards on a log I'd placed out under a bit of cover and stuff, and I saw one in January, bizarrely, which was on the podcast. I was expecting to have seen one by now, and obviously I haven't been at work. I only popped in and walked past the log twice last week when I was doing work. Bright sunny day, not a sign of them. And I've seen lots of pheasants hanging around there, and I do worry. Hopefully they're just dispersed into the meadow, but there's not that much cover there as well. But yeah, it does concern me somewhat. But yeah, like I say, that's something that's, a lot of people like to attack Chris Packham and the Wild Justice team, but I praise them for pushing in Natural England. Well, I have heard various stories about research into pheasants' impact onto reptiles and other wildlife being, how should we say, universities have been reluctant to fund them because they might upset their backers and funders. Although the Game Wildlife Conservation Trust trying to get ahead of the curve, I think, and have issued a PhD. But one of the study's aims is to analyse pheasant poo to see what's in them. But someone has fed a dead slowworm to, I don't know if it was a pheasant or a chicken, and there was no trace of it in the poo. the remains. It just dissolved a lot of it. So
Yes,
you know,
yes.
so hopefully they'll do a thorough job of, making sure. There's that study from Exeter University, wasn't it? But it wasn't conclusive. It just it did suggest that pheasants were not a good thing for native wildlife. Well, when you've got double the biomass of pheasants, have we got all the other wild birds? That can't be a good sign.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, it is insane, isn't it?
I mean, imagine if you did that with dogs or cat. Well, we have conduct with cats. Just let dogs roam. The worst thing is with pheasants, isn't it, is that they're livestock until the person rearing them lets them go. So legally speaking, you could have a load of pheasants by the side of the M25, let hundreds of them go. They cause all these car accidents, and you go, wild animal, nothing to do with me, gov.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know how that would stand up in court, but
It's a very, very strange situation with pheasants.
I feel we've dwelled on pheasants a bit there. But yes, a pet concern of mine, shall we say? As much as I love them, so photogenic, but sort of horrifying. So, do you have any questions for Steve and Vic?
Well, we've got this one from Alan,
who's
a fan of the show, and he said, "What are you most looking forward to seeing when we can get out after the lockdown?"
That's a very good question, Alan. I mean, one of the things is obviously I don't visit at the moment my two local patches, one of which is the sort of reed bed on the edge of the levels, and one is the coastal area, and particularly the coastal area. I'm missing that lovely change you get where you often see things for the first time down there, and things surprise you in spring in particular. You suddenly get 20 whimbrel or coming through. Now I might get that here. I remember on my 50th birthday, which sadly was 9.5 months ago, so do the maths, we were taking the kids to school and there were 11 whimbrel in the field that is now my new patch where I do my dog walking and my bike riding at the back of my house. So maybe, I've had whimbrel over the house once or twice, so maybe I'll get that this year. But it's more the places we go to. I think, one of the joys of this has been I'm really focusing on this patch at the back of me. I've had 55 species this year, of which I think 45 or something I've had since the lockdown. And I've had some real surprises. Marsh harrier flew over. I was out with my wife for a walk on her birthday a couple of weeks ago, and a marsh harrier flew past. Wheatear yesterday, Chetty's warbler today. Who knows? Swallows the other day. So next couple of weeks, I'm really excited actually, and I'm trying to not think about other places I was going to go, like Japan in May and Turkey in June, both of which are now off. I'd managed to persuade my wife that I needed a birthday present, which was a 5-day birding trip to Turkey, and she said yes in a unguarded moment. And I'm taking my two 15-year-old kids, George and Daisy, to Japan to see their older brother who works there in May, and I was rather looking forward to sneaking out to the parks and doing some birding. So I've never been to East Asia at all. But yeah, in the end, you have to go with what you've got, don't you? So what I'm doing is saying, actually, this year I will see more butterflies in the garden. I will see more birds in my garden in the local area than I've had really since the first year we were here, when my garden was my local patch for the first 2 or 3 years. So I think you have to make the best of what we've got. I feel very privileged to live where I do, in that I do live in a beautiful place, even though I'm only going, the furthest I'm going from my house is about a mile as the crow flies on my bike ride, and walking the dog. But there's enough there to keep me going. And the next month or two is going to be lovely. I think if the lockdown goes on after that, by about July, I'll be thinking, I've seen everything now. Because what it's like with birds. The first 6 months of the year, you basically see about 90% of the species you're going to see on there. But yeah, I think, we have to we just have to be thankful that we're not ill.
Yeah.
Because in 2 weeks' time, I reach the age where I'm suddenly at high risk statistically. I'm not sure it makes much difference, but the birthday party is not quite as good as it was going to be, but never mind.
I'm just slightly gutted, and my favourite wildlife wise month of the year is May.
Absolutely.
Although they are talking about the peak being April now, which is not to say a good thing, because obviously it means less time to prepare. But hopefully we'll get out by the end of May. I'm hoping.
Yeah, I think they're going
June at least, because by July I'm starting to feel like things are waning a little bit. Even though that's the peak for the Essex dragonflies, it kind of feels like that. Not the best is behind you, but most of it's behind you already. Yeah. And you're kind of like, I've got another year to wait now. Sort of.
But then
very negative way of looking at it, but I know it's a.
Then if you think about it, when you get to
May to come.
when you get to kind of July and then you go into August and September, you've got all the spiders and the grasshoppers and the crickets
Exactly.
starting
I
to
always
come
forget
out.
that.
So,
I always forget that sort of
you
bit.
know,
Yeah.
they're I
And you've
love
got
kind
till
of going
October,
out.
haven't you? Really?
You
These
have.
days?
I mean, you can still find some fantastic grasshoppers and bush crickets. I've photographed great green bush crickets in Somerset
Oh, yeah.
in back end of September, and one site has rufous grasshoppers as well. So I've been able to pick those up. And
Somerset's a fantastic county, isn't it, for wildlife? It's a bit underrated. Bird-wise, it doesn't get all the real rarities, but it's got enough rarities that live here all the time. Like I did see 5 cattle egrets when I was driving the other day to go to the shops. There were 5 cattle egrets in the field. So,
You won't get much sympathy from me about only being underrated when I live in Essex, in the shadow of Kent, Cambridgeshire, Norfolk, Suffolk.
Essex is very good for wildlife.
For dragonflies, I feel quite privileged to be the dragonfly
you
reporter.
still
We
haven't,
finally
have
got
you?
Norfolk Hawker, by the way, in Essex.
Yeah. Oh, yes, and you were going to call the southern migrant dragon hawker Essex hawker, weren't you?
Yes,
But
yeah. My petition to do so didn't go down very well.
oh, it's great.
I think it was valid until about till year before last, when it turned up everywhere in England. But
well, I'll be looking this spring. It might be around here.
Yeah, I mean, you say the season. I mean, there might be another lockdown. Let's not get too negative. But last November, middle of November, I had a southern hawker flying around at work. So, and now we've got willow emeralds. Or you guys might not have. Now we've got willow emeralds. They last till October easily.
Yeah, well, you showed one very nice dragonfly as well.
Oh, they're beautiful. Yeah, you got them right at the start of the season. The amount this year, if you went anywhere near any half decent or any half suitable water body for them, they were there. And meadows nearby, they were there. I almost got bored of them. There were so many of them.
Isn't it how they get so common so quickly?
It's quite interesting, their distribution. How I mean, we're going to do a dragonfly episode, probably talk about it then. But they sort of came in, and like the small red eyes, they just seemed to they hit a point where they just stopped spreading from the southeast. And we had those 2 hot summers, and especially last summer, they went. The willow emeralds went from, where were they, north up? I think they got as far as Lincolnshire. They jumped all the way up to North Yorkshire last year.
Yeah.
No, the population hit about
how dragonflies respond so much quicker than butterflies, for example, or even dragonflies. Yeah.
But it might be because with the dragonflies and damselflies, they need the water bodies, whereas the butterflies are very reliant on like the meadows, the gardens, or whatever to lay their eggs. And we've seen big changes here. So a couple of years ago, when we had that big heat wave, like the 8 weeks of 30-degree heat, and everything was just dry and parched, the following year we actually saw a decline in some of the butterfly species that would have been their flight period and also kind of egg laying period.
Yeah, that's right. If it's too hot, so I think that that does happen with a lot of things, doesn't it? If it's too hot, then it's too hot. People think like sun. They actually like the typical English summer, which is 2 fine days and a thunderstorm, or someone might call it.
And I think likewise, if you get it like the other end of the scale, we had a very wet summer, and one of the sites that I've surveyed quite often, right on my doorstep here, always used to be an amazing site for marbled whites. Incredible. You'd go up there and just be so many marbled whites up there. And one summer it was just the worst summer possible. And they started their flight season, mating, laying their eggs, and then it rained for about 3 weeks. And the following year you were lucky if you counted double figures of marbled whites at this site.
Yeah.
I mean, there's natural peaks and troughs with any species anyway, but it's never really recovered from that.
Yeah.
In the few years since, I've gone up there and I've been lucky to find one.
Yeah, no, I think that does happen, doesn't it? You see, and that's again the thing about watching things locally. And I always say to people, get a local patch, because then you notice these changes. You notice new arrivals. You notice things getting commoner and rarer. Things you took for granted have suddenly disappeared, and things you never thought you'd see are suddenly common. And it happened so quickly. When I was a kid, when I was a kid, only I think in the whole of the 20th century, there'd only been like 2 or 3 species had disappeared, and 3 or 4 had colonized Britain. And suddenly it's for birds. Suddenly it's gone mad since then, and the ups and downs are much greater than they used to be, I think. The big thing where we are now is ravens. They're just dozens of, and when I was a kid, my mum had to drive me to Wales to see a raven from London. There were not, there were a few on Dartmoor and Exmoor and things, Scotland, Northern England, but there certainly weren't any in Somerset, and there weren't any when we moved 14 years ago. There were, I saw one or two in the first couple of years, and now every day I see half a dozen. They were tumbling over the garden today.
Yeah, we've got a pair. I work in North Essex. They're the first pair in like 100 and something years.
Yeah, that's right. Essex and Kent would have had none. Yeah, they're on the White Cliffs of Dover now.
Yeah, there's a pair in North Kent nesting on the pylons, and they quite often cross the Thames to Rainham Marshes and then head back again.
Yeah. Great.
But, the noise they make is sometimes you're like, is that a raven? And if you doubt it, it's not a raven. That's what I've worked out now. And then you hear it, just like, oh wow, just a lovely noise.
It turned out to be a pig. And then I was at some kind of farm, and it grunted. And right.
Oh, fantastic! Wood pigeon, I think it was started. I was it wood pigeon colour dove muddled up. Started singing today, and my nearly 4-year-old daughter said, "Oh, it's an owl, Daddy." I was like, "No, it's actually a pigeon, but yeah, it sounds like an owl." Yep. So she's getting there.
Good one today. Something I hadn't heard in my garden. I see them a lot, but again, because I haven't been sitting out there, I hadn't heard it for ages. Was stock doves calling.
Oh, lovely.
A really odd call. It's really distinctive. It's their sort of advertising call. They display over the garden. They're probably the most overlooked British bird. They're absolutely everywhere. No one ever notices.
I don't like stock doves because I've still never made a picture of them. They're evil. They always say, I do like them. I love them. They're fantastic. They've got the same eyes as the penguin in Wallace and Gromit. Next time you look at one, you'll know what I mean.
Absolutely right. They have. Yes. Evil.
I remember just looking at one and just going, oh my God, it's the penguin. But because they constantly move on the ground, they're quite often in a shady bit under a tree or something like that. And they're just that bit more skittish than wood pigeons and obviously feral pigeons. I've never quite managed, and I've got some okay shots, but not that really nice shot of one. And just to rub salt in the wound, they were in my local park growing up. Obviously, I didn't notice them growing up because I couldn't tell them apart. But when I first started photography, and it's always in the wooded bit they're in, and there's always dogs going through. So they were reasonably tame there, but you just couldn't get a shot because they're not stopped. But now there's at least a pair that sit out on the lawn outside my office at work, taunting me. But if I even stand up in my office, they usually fly off. And I've managed to slightly open the door and I just never managed a shot of them. So I sort of love them and hate them at the same time. We think wood pigeons would be shyer, but the amount they get shot by farmers in a rural area. But no, the stock doves are shyer. But there is a lot of sparrowhawks around. That might be part of the reason.
I actually said something that I don't think I've knowingly ever seen. And when we get wood pigeons in the garden and they sit on the roof, so our garden backs onto the garages from someone else's house, and they sit on the roof almost every morning at the moment, either calling or doing what birds do at this time of year.
I get referred to as fat wood pigeons by me because they're always fat on one side.
Do you know, they're absolutely huge. You look at them and I swear, you look at you think, how can you even fly? You are that big. You are waddling down my garden. How can you fly?
They're much neater. They're really, and they've got very distinctive, quite a stiff wing flight. So much so that I was driving before the lockdown about 3 or 4 weeks ago, driving down and there was two birds above me, and at first I thought it was a bird having a go at a sparrowhawk or something, and I realised it was both the same species, and I thought, oh my God, they're peregrines, they look quite stiff wings. And I got out of the car and looked up, and they were two stock doves flying in sort of formation around each other, but they just, that grey look and the sort of wing shape just for a moment,
they do look on the ground like feral pigeons, don't they? If you're not looking carefully, and then you realise they look completely different but the same. It's really weird.
This neck pattern, sheen on the neck, and the little yellow bill. And in flight, they've got black trailing edges of the wing.
Yeah, I was told a story about wood pigeons. Someone told me a story. It's a story told by someone else to someone else. So judge for yourself if it's true, but I can believe it. Someone said they saw a fox in their garden watching a wood pigeon under a bird feeder, and the fox just sat there watching, let the wood pigeon fill up its crop to get heavier and heavier, and then charged out to grab it. I think the wood pigeon still got away, but they reckon the fox just waited till it was at maximum weight. So it takes a lot of effort for a wood pigeon to take off. You see the slow motion of them with the downward drive of the wing, and there's a whole podcast on flight and why pterosaurs get bigger, because they could use their wing muscles to take off, but to cover another time. I think quite fascinating stuff for that. I fear I have encouraged waffling somewhat because we've gone well over the hour mark for pre-editing. I guess we better start wrapping up there. We usually go on for another 10 minutes when I say let's wrap up. So,
Well, not
well,
at all. It's been really nice to talk to you
yeah,
guys.
as I say, so thank you for
It's
coming
been
on.
lovely having you on. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Hopefully, yeah, we'll meet once it's all over. Yeah, let me know and we'll meet
Yeah.
down. I'd love to get your expertise on inserts. Also, been looking at your wonderful photography.
Oh, thank you.
Which is not bad, is she?
Really crappy photographs, but I know what makes a good one.
It's one thing I think I'm probably missing the most now. I've not done any proper photography since October,
Yeah.
and I've probably got at least 2 to 3 months, if I'm lucky, before I can even think about picking my camera up again. So,
Yeah.
minimum.
On the upside, at least some of that time is now going to be when you couldn't have got out anyway. So
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I've already had what,
you already
October,
had
November,
enough.
December,
Had your
January,
fill,
February.
yeah.
I'd already had 4 months head start on everyone else.
Yeah.
So
You did squeeze in some Lammergeier photography in the middle of that though, so I'm not going to have too much sympathy.
I did, and I had an absolutely wonderful group with me that helped me kind of get my bags into the hides and set my cameras up and stuff.
That's a great bird.
You know
So
what? I'm not a bird
yeah.
person, but a Lammergeier would do it for me. They are cracking like a hoopoo and a hoopoo. But you're so wrong if you don't like a hoopoo though. So yeah.
To me, I mean, when you see them that close, I mean, Lammergeier is probably my favourite bird in the world. I'm not going to lie, they're right up there. Probably one of my favourite birds in the world.
Stunning, beautiful.
There you go. There's a question for Stephen. Favourite bird?
Well, it's a good question. It used to be swift, and for many years it was swift because
Good
I lived in
choice.
London, and I loved them because they were the sign of spring. And then I moved to Somerset, and I've written about this in my next book, which is on the swallow. And I'm afraid the swallow has now taken over. And having just finished my book on it, delivered it last week, which comes out in the autumn, swallows are just fantastic. I mean, amazing, incredible birds. So are swifts still, but I think swallow now edges it. And I did South Africa in January to see somewhere between 1 and 3 million swallows at a roost.
Wow.
So I didn't spot my neighbour, but you know.
Is it the South African ones like the British ones?
Yeah.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, these are all over Europe, and you can't tell obviously, but yeah, stunning things. And the fact that they weigh half as much as a standard packet of crisps, and they still get back here, and they come back to the place they were born. That's quite impressive. And they're back now. They got back on Saturday.
I've not seen any yet. I do wonder what's going to happen. We had a house 2 doors down, and she actually had, so the garage was kind of built into the house, but she always kept the back of it open. And for many years, she had swallows nesting in there. And then she sold and moved.
Yeah.
But before she moved, one of the conditions was basically that they cleared out the swallow nests and blocked off the garage so they couldn't get in anymore, which is such a shame. And I don't know what happened to them. I've not seen them back. We would see them coming and going every day, and now we've just not seen them.
You just don't get swallows near me or house martins. We do get the swifts, thank God, but yeah, the hirundines have basically disappeared. And that's another gutting thing of where I work up in North Essex. Obviously the wildlife's a bit richer in many ways. It's actually poorer in some other ways, but bird life it's better. And work's got swallows, house martins, and even bloody I know you're in the southwest, it's not quite so special, but in South East England, spotted flycatchers nesting.
No, that's a very special bird for us. We don't see many of them.
I mean, obviously some places like Wales and Devon and it's more Devon's got that sort of thing, isn't
That's
it?
right.
Yeah,
they're just declining everywhere.
But they've basically just evaporated from Essex almost entirely now, and they've also one of the few reliable sites for turtle doves in Essex as well. They have them on their garden feeders outside the building next to the reserve. It's just insane. And unless I may miss it this year, having waited 6 months working there or longer, but always next year, provided I'm still working there.
I think that's
have
the
I got
thing,
to pick my
isn't it?
favourite bird actually? I should probably do
Yes,
mine.
you haven't picked yours, yeah.
Oh God, nearly got away with it. Oh God, I could pick one from each group. Can I do that?
No, you can pick one bird.
Well, it's between Fulmer, Hobby, which is ironic being that I love dragonflies, and curlew. I'm gonna go with Fulmer because they're just anything that can take out sea eagles. So I was having an argument between gannets and Fulmers between me and my good friend Dave Presland, and he's team gannet and I'm team Fulmer. And gannets, amazing birds. I've seen them dive in. I've had one skim my head over on a boat diving for fish. But Fulmers, it was up one of the Scottish islands where they introduced sea eagles, or they introduced an island next door. None of the sea eagles survive there because they fly too close to the cliff. the Fulmars.
Sterile. That was the very first ones, 1967.
Is it those ones? Yeah, the Fulmars squirted their fish juice on their wings. They couldn't fly and they died.
It's oil. Yeah, they cough up oil. It's horrible.
Yeah, that's still amazing. They're mini albatrosses. You go. You can't beat them. And the fact that was it in the 30s or 40s they're restricted to the parts of the west coast, was it, or
That's
somewhere,
right,
and they spread all around the UK, but they didn't go. They only went one way.
Yeah, in the 1870s they were only on St Kilda and I think Fula. So
amazing,
in 100 years they spread right round and they're everywhere now. Yeah, beautiful birds. James Fisher, who's my great hero, sort of Attenborough of his day, he wrote a whole massive book on the Fulmar. He loved them.
I have found something extraordinary. I'm trying to think what it's called. Sutton Bank in Yorkshire. It's miles inland, and apparently they nested on there.
Oh yeah, that's the sort of
inland nesting Fulmars. You know, a seabird nests.
Do that, don't they?
But the only place they've nested facing inland is Castle. Yeah, they nest on the wall facing inland. But apparently, even the Sutton Bank one's facing out to sea. So it's still technically a sea-facing cliff. It just happens to be sort of 40, 50 miles inland or whatever it is. It's extraordinary. So there you go. So we're finishing up and we've gone on for another, I don't know how long.
Brilliant. Okay, guys. Well, nice to talk to you.
Well, thank you so much for going on, Stephen.
Yeah,
it's been
thank you.
great
It's
to have
been
you.
brilliant.
Pleasure. And we'll talk soon again, I'm sure. And
yes.
Yourselves
to have you back on.
listening, look after yourself.
Yeah, you too.
You take care.
And that goes all you out there as well.
Yeah, so everyone, please do take care of yourselves, and send us your sightings from your gardens as well, because we'd love to know what you're seeing either in your own gardens when you go out for your one piece of exercise a day. Let us know what you're seeing. You know, are you starting to see swallows come back? You know, is it a bird, or are you seeing more butterflies starting to come out? What about bees? You know, bumblebees are certainly coming out now. So, you know, drop us a line on either Facebook or Twitter at UK Wildlife Podcast, because we'd just love to see what you're seeing.
And hearing.
And hearing too, yes.
And touching and hopefully not tasting.
Yeah.
Okay then, right. Well, that's it from us.
So take care until next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.